So this weekend, Celine and I are competing in the Kiathlon.ie Virtual Adventure Race Series. It's the third weekend of it, and this weekend we've a 10k run. In our case, it's going to be a road run. We're restricted to our 5-kilometer lockdown. So just wanted to do a quick little demonstration on how to prepare and pace and execute a strategy for a race like this. So first off, you're going to need some route planning software because you're going to need to know your distances and how you're going to plan your race. So there are a number of route planning softwares on the market, and I'm going to do a quick demo on how we do it on two of the more popular ones. The first one being Komoot and the second one being Strava. So we go to Komoot, we'll go into our route planner, and the first thing we do with Komoot is we select what activity that we're doing. So in this case, we're going running, but we could also pick hiking, biking, gravel, cycling, etc. So we go running, and we're going to set what our fitness is. So probably somewhere between average and in good shape. The other options they give us is athletic and pro, certainly not in those categories. So I'll leave it in good shape, and what that determines is the times that it calculates. Komoot does a pretty good job in calculating times. So I am going to go into my map. You can zoom down onto your map, and most of these have the same kind of a setup. You select broadly a starting point, and you click on the map, you click start here in the case of Komoot, and I'm going to finish over here at a scenic point looking out over Tragumna, and for some reason it has me bike touring. It's giving me options here, so I'm going to select running again, and it's giving me a run that it's saying is 5 kilometers long, so that's no good. So I'm going to zoom back out again. I'm going to put my cursor here in the middle, and I'm going to drag it out. This is pretty local to me, so I know these roads. And here we go now, we're at 10.4 kilometers, so just a little bit on the long side. So if I zoom in a little bit here, I can see that it's doing some sort of a weird routing. Komoot in particular is inclined to do this a little bit. So I'm just going to again just drag it here, and this is my desired finish point here. And we're now at 10.3 kilometers, so almost there. So I have my finishing point, I just need to go a little bit further back to get my starting point. Let's see now that I've got everything that I want. So 10.3, so I'm gonna have to go a little bit forward, so at about 300 meters. So 9.8, come to here, 9.98. So 10 kilometers exactly. So I now have my finish point, I have my start point. Now if I come over here to the layers, I'll just do that again. There's a little button here for layers. If I click that, I can go into my satellite overlay, and if I zoom in, I can see where exactly on the road, because obviously this is just an arbitrary starting point in the middle of nowhere. But again, relatively local to me. I know that particular farm entrance, so it's telling me it's just around this farm entrance here. So that's where I'm going to start tomorrow, and that's probably about 1 kilometer from where we live. So what I'll do is we'll come back I'll go back to the standard Komoot map. We'll probably do an easy run over to the start point. We'll do our 10k, and then we've got another, I know it off the back of my hand anyway, probably about 6 kilometers home as a bit of a cool down run. So I'll do the same exercise quickly now in Strava, just to show you the differences. And obviously here, all I would do is save tour. It would generate a file that I could then download to a GPX file onto my watch, or a head unit in the case of a bike. They all do something very similar. So Strava does something similar. So now for Strava, you do need a pro account. You go into my routes, and you go you select the type of activity you have. So in this case it's running, create a new route, and just for speed here, so it's showing me the global heat map. I can also overlay my own personal heat map, on the file. There we go. So this is all the running I've done in this particular locality. I'm gonna knock both of those off, and I now know roughly where my starting point is. So it was about here. Put in my finish point, and Strava obviously wants to take me on the shortest way. So again, I'm going to put my cursor on the route between them, because I've got at this stage that's just over 5 kilometers. I'm going to drag it back onto my desired route, and it's coming in there at Strava 9.95. So just drag it another 50 meters, and we're in around the 10k. And according to Strava, they'll all have little quirks in them, but according to Strava, if I now go to, they have their overlays are here, so there's standard, satellite, hybrid, etc. If I go to the satellite overlay, it's putting it probably 20 or 30 meters the other side of where Komoot said it is, but maybe that's just a difference in the finish points as well. I'm not going to worry about it too much. I have my starting point. Now, what's interesting is, again, I know this route pretty well. This route has me starting at, according to Strava, about 79 meters. We're dropping down to, in Tragumna here, about 6 meters. And then we have a tough climb back until about just the 9 kilometer mark, and then a little bit of a downhill to the finish. So I suppose the question is, how do you pace a run like this? So just to look at the differences between the two of them, Strava is estimating that it's going to take me 1 hour and 9 minutes. And if I go back to Komoot, it's estimating that it'll take me 1 hour and 2 minutes. And if I change my fitness level here in Komoot, if I say I'm athletic, 56 minutes. So yeah, I'd be figuring I'd be in around the hour mark for something like that. So if I could just go back to in good shape, we leave it at 1 hour. So if we say broadly it's going to take 1 hour, that's a 6 minute per kilometer pace. And most of the experts would say that you should be aiming for a negative split. And what a negative split simply means is that your first 5 kilometers should be slightly slower than your second 5 kilometers. So your first half should be slightly slower than your second half, so that you don't exert yourself too hard in the first half of any race. And it's the same principle whether you're on a bike, kayak, etc. And what this means is you keep something in reserve for the second half. But I suppose, you know, that's great in theory if we were running this weekend now on a flat track with no wind. But, you know, knowing this route like I do, you know, the first section is a kind of an easy gradual drop towards the sea. And then there's a couple of little bumps along the way that are quite steep. It's West Cork, there's plenty of bumps, and then there's one really tough little climb before I finish back onto a downhill. So I suppose the challenge is, how do you pace a run like that? Because knowing what I know, the first 5 kilometers is easier than the second 5 kilometers. So there is a few ways that you can do it. The simplest way, but probably not the most correct way of doing it, is just going on pace. So if I was targeting 1 hour to finish my 10k, I would probably target a pace of around 6 minutes 5 per kilometer for the first 5k, and then I'd be looking to maybe go sub 6 for the last 5 kilometers. So I'd be looking to pick up the pace. But again, in terms of effort, the first 5k tomorrow is going to be far easier than the second 5k. So we need other tools to help us pace that negative split. One of the ways we can do it is using our heart rate. the simplest way, but again, probably the weakest way of doing it is to use the heart rate monitor on the wrist of your watch. However, in our experience, wrist-based heart rate tracking tends to be inaccurate. The wrist, if you were to pick somewhere to track your heart rate, is probably one of the least desirable place from the point of view of the hardware manufacturers to actually track your heart rate. Now, because Sunto, Garmin, Polar, Apple et al. Are selling us a watch, they're putting a heart rate monitor into it. And in general, for day-to-day activities where it's taking a reading every few minutes, it's not bad. But when you're out on an all-out athletic endeavor, there tends to be errors, because what tends to happen on your wrist is it gets looser, it loses connection. This section of your wrist here tends to be quite bony, and it doesn't get a nice clean reading. Now, most of the manufacturers, in this case like Sunto here, will recognize that, and you'll get a message at the end of your run tell you that where to wear it, etc., etc. But over the course of an event, when you're sweating and you're going hard, and etc., etc., that doesn't tend to hold. So most watch manufacturers recognize this, and most of them will talk to a heart rate monitor over Bluetooth. I use a Soshi one here, which is on your arm. You just click it onto, you can put it on your lower arm or your upper arm, so it goes on something like this, and you just turn it on, and when I start my run, it recognizes it. Now, up here on the upper arm, or you can use underneath, tends to be a much better place to pick up a reading, and tends to be pretty accurate. So I tend to trust my heart rate when I'm wearing this. Celine, on the other hand, prefers a chest strap, and this is the Wahoo one, which is one of the more popular ones. And again, this just it goes around your chest. You click it on, and again, it talks to your watch. However, the weakness of heart-based monitoring is that over the course of, say, an hour tomorrow, your heart rate will start to drift. So what that means is that as you get further and further into a strenuous activity, your heart rate gradually starts to climb. So, for example, if my heart rate for the first kilometer was 140, by kilometer 5 it'll be in the 150s, and by kilometer 7 it'll be in the 160s, and maybe by the last kilometer 180s. But my effort may have been relatively steady on those. So while heart rate gives you a good overall kind of indication, it's not probably the perfect way to track your effort. Probably the most accurate way to track your effort on a road run is to use a power meter. This one here is from Stride. It's probably one of the more popular ones, and you just click it on your shoe, and that picks up how many watts you're putting out. So again, it's Bluetooth enabled. It'll talk to your watch, and you can set a parameter on your watch that you want to go out at 240 watts, and if you can set a parameter up and down, and it'll beep if you go above or below that. So again, if you know your numbers in terms of power, this is probably the most accurate way of doing it, but tends to be quite expensive, and not sure if I'd recommend it to most people. I've used this over the last number of years. I'll do something a little bit more in depth on it down the road, but for somebody who's maybe not an active runner, and I'm not an active enough runner, I'm more of an adventure racer, and I like to do a little bit of running, a little bit of biking, kayaking, hiking, etc. This is probably a relatively expensive investment, but I would certainly recommend that you would get some type of an accurate heart rate device, because you can use it on the bike, you can use it on the kayak, you can use it for hiking. Tracking your heart rate and knowing broadly where your zones are is something that's very well worthwhile. And saving all that, you can go with the very, very old-fashioned feel. So, you know, perceived exertion is one of the ways that some athletes will work. And, you know, there's a whole table there, 1 through 10, in terms of perceived exertion. And, you know, for a 10K like this, you might say, look, we'll go out at a perceived 6, and, you know, knowing that our heart rate's going to drift in the second half, we're going to push to a perceived 7 or something along those lines. So that's how you line up and plan for something like a virtual 10K, but there's a lot of the same lessons apply if you're in an actual event. So hope that's helpful, and we might get into a bit more depth in another video on some of the topics mentioned.